So I know this is the monetizing track, and it's not the blockchain track, but I am going to be talking about engaging and building your cohort blockchain games edition. First, who the hell is this lady? I am co-founder and CMO of Quorum Control. We are building a permissionless proof-of-stake blockchain platform that's sort of purpose-built for things like games. I cover a little bit of an end-to-end concept on our platform in this talk, but given time constraints and because that's not really the focus of this talk, I won't go into too many details, but I would love to show, I would love to geek out on that with anybody who's interested after. You can come find me, I can find you. I've been in the digital marketing space for just under 20-ish years and spent just over the last decade specifically in games, first in web and then mobile. I built out and led the strategy and teams for the retention side at both Kabam and Scopely, two of the larger mobile game publishers. So I've been doing the sort of very specific retention and engagement for post-acquisition users for a number of years. It's my wheelhouse, it's what I love. Blockchain is sort of the next natural evolution of platforms. You know, web, when mobile came along, there was this big disruption and people were sort of scrambling to adapt, and I feel like that's a lot what's happening now, and so jumping in to tackle that challenge has been something I'm interested in. So, what this talk isn't. This talk isn't going to talk about the strategies and tactics for engaging and building a cohort in the traditional gaming space. The principles are largely the same, but the strategies and tactics by which you go about them are different. Because we might have a little bit of time after the talk, because the person after me isn't here, I'm happy to answer questions about that. Again, it's the world that I come from, but this specifically is going to be blockchain. I'm sure everybody's familiar with it. It's kind of the new hotness buzzword, but it is games built on a secure and transparent, decentralized P2P computer network. Why do players love it? Items have real verifiable value. We talk a lot, the panel before me spoke about this, we talk a lot about perceived value and making sure users feel like they're getting an experience and feel like they're getting value. In blockchain games, it sort of frees you up to build some really cool shit because items have actual, real, verifiable value. And embracing that means that you can create exclusivity, real digital scarcity, and you can really leverage that. You're no longer shackled by this perceived value that we always put ourselves in. In addition, the players get a little bit more control over those. They have trade value. So they're able to invest in things that they wouldn't normally invest in because there's no immediate use for them. And so players are thinking differently about how they purchase and when they purchase and what they purchase to a level that doesn't happen in traditional games. So then why isn't everybody at the block party? Well, there are some challenges. For the purpose of this talk, we're going to focus on the builders. The players, getting the builder challenges solved, solving the player challenges falls on the builders. Build it for players, it's mostly about demystifying the tech, helping them understand cryptocurrency and how you make trades and getting them to sort of rally around this new world order for games. On the builder side, there's three pretty big challenges. The first two are technical challenges. The first two are kind of the impetus for Tupelo, the platform that we're building at Quorum Control, the impetus for sort of why we exist. There's this scalability issue that's sort of plaguing adoption. To compute the transactions on blockchain, it requires a massive amount of energy. And what happens is that simple and innocuous seeming transactions then become burdened with long wait times, heavy processing times, and then that offsets costs dramatically. So it's just very difficult to scale. The second is this development learning curve. A lot of traditional platforms have complicated, nuanced things like smart contracts that require understanding a completely new piece of technology. The first two are technical challenges, and not what we'll really focus on here, but they are sort of the impetus for why Tupelo exists. So if you guys want to talk through in detail kind of these challenges, I would love to show you how our platform is solving for them. The third is what this talk will really focus on, and this is not technical, this is cultural. As builders, we've got this fear of giving up our centralized control. I mean, how can we make a game and then not control every part of it, not hold our data close to our, clutch our data like they're pearls. And it's a really cultural shift that hopefully after this talk you'll feel a little bit more empowered to kind of give that a try and experiment. Well, damn, that does sound hard, but why would anybody do it? Well, the opportunities are huge, especially right now. There is a massive amount of investment in finding the one or the two. There is, just in this last 3 months, $200 million in funding small indie projects to go and experiment with this technology. Investment in this space, the likes of which we in this industry have never seen. Levels the playing field. This means that indie developers, smaller developers, developers that haven't traditionally been able to keep up with the monolith, giant IP, Hollywood-driven titles, have a chance to build something really cool, potentially meaningful, because investment is kind of a free-for-all right now. It is largely held belief that this technology is coming and that games will be the critical driver for mass adoption. It makes sense, right? Games are where the DAUs are. Games are what the most amount of people are doing together in this digital space. And it's a kind of adapt or perish. This is a really good quote from Dean Takahashi at I believe it was at PocketGamer in LA. But his point is correct, is that a lot of players, a lot of big players are just kind of sitting by and waiting to see what happens with this tech, or they're not fully invested in that it's not just hype, and they will perish, or they'll be in a position where they've got to make some serious acquisitions or be acquired. And we really believe that, and we think that the critical takeaway here is that decentralization levels this playing field in a way that very few platforms ever have, especially in gaming. So, how do we then rally around this cultural shift? Building blockchain games fundamentally changes the way that we as builders must think about our community and our product. It doesn't mean that we can't monetize. It doesn't mean that we have to give up gotcha systems or give up subscription passes or give up any of the things that we've spent years honing. All of the talks here are helping sharpening. It just means that we have to be creative. We have to think differently because this tech is fundamentally different for the players. So I'm going to walk through what I believe are the critical drivers to making this cultural shift in sort of embracing this new technology. The first is this real-world value idea, is that builders must design with this in mind. It is no longer the idea that we are, sort of one of the points that Oscar made earlier was that subscription models are great, but you have to have room for upsell. And that's the tricky bit, right, is that once you as the maker of this sword has decided its value, it's arbitrary depending on who's using it. But these items aren't. The people that own these items in-game, they have real verifiable value. They are motivated completely differently. They will invest in different things that might yield them more money, that are powerful for their gameplay, but it opens up the possibility for so many more purchase motivators. Airdrops are a thing that we see a lot in the space, and they're used to sort of stoke engagement, but they are very short-term thinking. They're not long-term strategy. A lot of builders coming into it think that just dropping a lot of the currency or token is the best way to sort of drive that engagement, but they really should just be used sparingly. They're really just to stoke. We're talking about building long-term, real, invested players. And this third, which is which is something I can't say enough, is that builders have the opportunity to create real digital scarcity and exclusivity. We're no longer spending, as a retention marketer, I can't tell you how many times I've tested creative to make something sound super important and super exclusive in a way that didn't sound like total bullshit. And this technology is, like I said, it frees us up to actually make cool, immersive experiences, because when we say this is a completely unique cat with completely unique DNA. You own it, and it has X, Y, and Z power in this game, and it's yours and yours alone to do whatever you want with it. That's a powerful message that even I can't screw up. So once you've designed with trade in mind, embrace decentralization. If you leave only remembering one thing about this whole talk, I really want it to be this concept. This is what is going to drive that cultural shift in building these games. Blockchain games open the door for real meaningful collaboration between other builders and your game. The next point sort of ties into this as well, but a great example of this, if anybody's familiar, is Satoshi's Treasure Hunt. So Satoshi's Treasure Hunt is this huge treasure hunt where the take is $1 million. Obviously, that is a very compelling motivator, but what it's done, and it's a puzzle solving. And so you have to, there's 1,000 keys and you have to find 400 of them in order to win. In order to win, you have to solve these super complex puzzles. It spans both the digital world and the real world. And what's happening is it's forcing these massive international alliances because, you know, if one of the keys, if you've unlocked all the puzzles and you know that one of the keys is in a coffee shop in Taiwan, but it's you and your buddy and you're in San Francisco, and guess what, you miss out on that key. So it's really forcing these huge communities of motivated puzzle solvers, code breakers, to work together on an international scale. For this technology, that's a really big deal. So right off the bat, you know, we know that in free-to-play gaming, people that join an alliance within the first 4 days have a 30% chance, a 30% greater chance of staying past day 45 in your game, which is the lifetime in mobile free-to-play. And so what's happening is that these alliances on this scale and in this collaborative way are generating massive participation, group participation, in a way that the game doesn't even have to do anything. The game just exists, and just by existing, people are forced into these collaborative efforts. The other thing that they're doing really well is that they've got these complicated cryptographic puzzles to solve. And that's not something that everybody can do, especially you know, especially just casual gamers that aren't part of a developer community. Which is the embrace decentralization piece, is that it's encouraging builders to build tools to make the game more immersive. And a lot of developers, they hear this, they would think, oh, Jesus, you know, like, I don't want players building stuff that touches my game. Well, in this case, you do, because to build chat features, to build alliance tools, to build all of those things that game developers have to build, in addition to all of the features that they want to build on their game, is a massive resource suck. And indie developers don't have that, and so they make choices about what should go in there. And those choices mean that your players aren't going to get a great chat, or you're going to have lots of third-party SDKs plugged in, and that's going to slow down your game. What's happening, and so the best example of this is this tool called Ordo. And Ordo is built in conjunction, it's built on top of this game. It has nothing to do with the crew that is building the Satoshi's Treasure. And it's built, and you can go, you can find alliances, you can work with your alliance, you can chat, you can, they have tools for helping with these cryptographic puzzles. And it's built in tandem to this game, and all it does is support and boost the engagement and the immersion of the core game itself. And that means that the Satoshi Treasure guys can focus on really, really hard puzzles. I mean, people are vying for $1 million, and any deviation, any distraction from the core concept of how do we make this game as fun and challenging as possible, they don't have to worry about building a chat, or they don't have to worry about, we need to have an alliance feature, otherwise people won't join an alliance, and then people won't play anymore because they can't solve a puzzle that's in a cafe in Taiwan. And that's not happening with this. So this idea of embracing decentralization, what's possible? I mean, what fueled your passion into this game? As gamers, what do you want from other games? And a lot of that is made possible through this technology. The third is tied to embracing decentralization, is that in blockchain games, you're not just moderating your community, you're participating. There's an opportunity for the makers of the game and the players of the game to really be immersed in the same world. One really great example of this, and the bonus is the pre-sale engagement. One really great example of this is Blockade Games is running a Neon District's boss auction. Now, they ran a boss auction for the most powerful asset in the game before the asset even launched. At last check, I think they were up to $20,000 before the asset even launched. And people bid for the opportunity to own this asset because they know that when it's the most powerful object in the game, once they're in the game, they have it. It is unique to them. It is the only one in existence. It has digital scarcity. In addition, they also gave players the opportunity to participate in creating the world they're going to play in. They got to be involved in design decisions, character decisions, world decisions. That kind of community partnership, we hear the idea a lot that community is a two-way street, and I think that community managers in traditional games have a really, really difficult job, and they are put in a very difficult position to make that feel genuine, to make that two-way street feel genuine, because they are in service to, they are there to moderate, and participating becomes tough once you're in service to the organization that you represent. And the last is, I think it's the elephant in the room. I think what I hear a lot from traditional game developers is this idea that like their data is life. You know, these centralized databases are their shackles. They not having every possible player action collected in a single database for you to then run your ad strategy or test different shards or whatever you're doing with your central database is jarring to builders. But what they're not seeing is that you have to think differently about your data source. Because it is decentralized, because these things are open source, you have access to an entire ecosystem, a shared ecosystem of player behavior, and not just limited to the game you've made, but their actual behavior in other games. What items do they care about in other games? What are people who aren't playing your game care about? What items don't people care about? What has surprising value? And there's lots of tools that you can tap into to get access to an entire ecosystem of information. So while you're giving up the concept of, I've collected your player information, I know who you are, so I can target this messaging, what you were getting in return is a better view into player behavior to make more informed decisions. So just overarching, those are sort of the critical elements that you need in order to engage these users on this platform. Well, cool, sounds reasonable, but what does that look like? Now again, we have a little bit extra time, so I can walk through this more slowly than I thought, but I do want, this gets published and shared, and so everybody will have access to it, and so I encourage everybody to sort of look more closely at it to what we're not able to cover here. But end-to-end concept, we think about this a lot on Tupelo. And while Tupelo is technically, technology is industry agnostic, it is really built with things like games in mind, because we're built on a foundation of ownership and ownership transfer. We're not built on sort of the currency foundation of traditional DLTs, which is more like a Wall Street model. And so end-to-end concept, we've really thought through how this could work for a developer building on our platform. And so it starts simply. This is mostly for people who aren't familiar with the sort of world of blockchain, but this cross-game portability. You've got this really badass sword and you want to take it into every game that you play. You want to use it everywhere. The idea that this sword has real, verifiable, tradable value. Well, damn, that is a way more badass sword, and that's the sword I want. What can I trade my total piece of crap for? And then this idea of, look at my inventory. I take pride in the things I've purchased until I am ready to trade and sell them. This idea of giving users the opportunity to show off what they have, to flaunt what they have, and to sell what they have. So concept one is this flexible and portable data structure, which enables improved intergame portability. So why Tupelo is different is that we are not built on one central blockchain. We are actually built what we call chain trees. And chain trees is every object and everything has its own chain tree. And that means that it makes for easier intergame portability. Now again, I don't want to go through these in detail just because this talk isn't about the Tupelo platform, but I do want you guys to see how we've thought about end-to-end these concepts of how you provide, or how you design with this trade value in mind, how you provide that value, how you embrace the decentralization, and then how users can engage with it. So taking your item, you've got this badass sword, taking it everywhere you go, to wield it everywhere. Concept 2 is that they can be used to supercharge a marketplace. A marketplace is a really hard thing for traditional games to build well, because it always feels like the game is selling you something and that users have arbitrary participation in that marketplace. Blockchain marketplaces have the potential to be lively marketplaces where users can exchange, where users can negotiate on their own behalf because the items are theirs. This lively marketplace has the potential to drive huge engagement. We know that users that engage in chat or engage in other shared functions in traditional games stay a lot longer. It makes sense, right? You're investing, now you've got a personal attachment to this. These marketplaces are doing that, except users are in control without sort of feeling like the value is arbitrary. And then beyond marketplaces, a way for players to show what they have. You know, collectors love features like this. You know, in the free-to-play model, we see a lot of release a skin or release a frame for your avatar, and those things have huge value to them in other sort of non-gameplay ways. And these brag wallets amplify that. They showcase things not just because I've amassed this collection and I'm so proud of it, but they showcase it in the way that now the user is the seller. So in summary, like I said, if you could only take away one thing from this whole talk, embrace decentralization. It's coming, and games will be the mass driver for this. There are so many ways that builders, especially indie developers, can build immersive, amazing games without the distraction of having to serve other punishing elements that exist in the free-to-play space right now. A shared ecosystem is a huge advantage, especially for smaller developers. And like I said, there's so much money and so much investment in this space right now, targeting indie developers who are resourced to experiment. That, you know, it almost feels, it's tough, right? Because you're a small developer and you don't have the resources to build your game, let alone start experimenting with other tech. But the investment right now in this space it's just never been like this in this space. And the more of us that rally around experimenting, the more opportunity there is for us to level the playing field. And this last one, which is a really, really critical point, I think that it comes up a lot. It came up in that last panel a lot, this idea of players feeling like they're participating. In blockchain space, they're invested in the experience. They're not just buying things for their gameplay. They're invested in the world that they're helping to build. And that's a really big deal. And I think that those opportunities are sort of really electrifying in the blockchain space right now. So I know I breezed over a couple parts, and like I said, I know this is blockchain and it's not the blockchain track, so I'm happy to answer questions about free-to-play and traditional, but I would love to sort of field any questions anybody has about this specifically.
We've got questions already. I was going to say, actually, this is an area I find personally fascinating, just for general...
Well, I am personally fascinated.
Just general information, is that, well, there is that, obviously. Yeah. Who knew you got flirting on stage as well? But having worked on Reality Clash, a lot of the stuff that you've been talking about is very, very familiar to me. So we had a lot of fun trying to work out how to make tokened items, like a weapon. How do you make a weapon? One of the key things that I learned was that you don't just use linear improvement. You've got to think about scissor, paper, stone style, you know, non-linear improvement. So don't just have a +1 hat of wonder. Have, you know, a red hat and a blue hat and have them do different things. And that kind of design thinking is actually incredibly important. Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, one of the challenges that we came up against, we heard in the other talk, the idea that like consistency is key, right? So once you start having events, once you start offering things to your players, you've got to keep that consistency going. And but at the end of the day, like yes, they are digital items, but they're humans making them, and you know.
designers can only design tweaks so much, and marketers can only sell those tweaks as so much value before players start calling bullshit. And we see it happen all the time in gacha. We see it happen all the time in loot bags. You know, like, and there's a pressure to create sort of a made-up value because you've hit the limit of what this thing can do, and so now you've got to go to the next thing, and you've got to make that seem like really important.
Well, this is what killed, well, not killed, but it made life very difficult in the early days of something like Magic the Gathering, because they started off just making monsters more difficult, and it broke the system. They had to kind of reset everything, and it, you know, makes their job harder. Actually, quick question before I go to Christian. How many people have actually done blockchain stuff in their games so far? And anyone? Okay. Anyone who's scared of blockchain? Yeah. Okay. That's seriously. Yeah. Anyone who's excited by blockchain? Okay. So we're kind of that's mostly positive, but let's go there. So first question. Hang on.
Hi, I'm Christina. I have a question around the decentralization while maintaining the accountability loop that we still inevitably have. So, for example, there are two aspects that I'm primarily interested in. You talked about players working on a chat system that you as a developer don't have to work about, but as soon as you then have a chat system, you have to worry about the accessibility aspect of it to be compliant to even legal aspects to it. And then if you allow players to create content on their own that is not owned by your company, and I'm aware that user-generated content is already a thing, you still have to maintain accountability for things like age ratings and, you know, age-appropriate contents. What's your take on that aspect? And I will say that I'm not the most deeply familiar person with blockchain, but like licensing is another aspect to it, to just maintain those compliances.
Sure. I'm not going to have all the answers on this, but decentralization as a form is designed to actually limit the risk of those things. It's much, much harder to do dubious stuff in a decentralized environment. And so traditionally, a lot of that is we learn as we go, kind of on the enforcement of things, but a lot of that is code of conduct and relying on the systems and rules that your decentralized system is in place to moderate. It's much, much harder to lie or get away with things when you've got 50 people spread across the world that are there to verify before you can move forward, or verify before something, becomes part of that world. And so things that are built in accessory to blockchain, like chat apps and things like that, you know, the logistics of who manages that and who ultimately is responsible for that is something I don't have the answer to. It's something in practice that I don't know that is technically regulated right now. That said, the idea of a decentralized world is inherently just much, much, much harder to do dubious things in. I
think what I'd add to that is, in some ways, the word decentralized is kind of missing the point. It's non-trusted. And this, in my head, this is the kind of what made it work. So when we were working out about things like, if somebody creates a gun and we want to sell that gun, well, the token actually knows who made it and who is going, you know, who currently owns it, and the history of who has owned it. So by building all of that all that information into the JSON file that's then securely wrapped, we have no need to trust who made it, because it's got to be a cluster of different servers that will verify it. And that act of verification means that it's still traceable because it's locked in, assuming you've designed it right, who made it. So they are still accountable for having made that thing available, and if they didn't have the IP rights, etc., then they would still be accountable for creating something which they didn't distribute it, because they're the ones who would be responsible for its act of creation and its availability.
The technology serves to be a more transparent view into an entire system. So, for example, in other industries and conflict minerals, developers are using it to verify the source of, say, gold or tungsten, or things that are traditionally, rife with fraud and this technology serves as a transparent view into that system. And so it's not trusted as in like, it's not trustworthy. It's not trusted in that like, you don't, you know, right now in using centralized systems, you agree to trust Facebook, and you agree to trust the game that you play, and you agree, and the game makers agree to trust the database, you know, MongoDB, that they're not going to do anything with there, and there's systems of contracts in place, and that protects everybody. But this is a system that does away with those things. So it's trustless, though it's not. It's
still trustworthy.
It's trustworthy, yeah. It's designed so that the existence of things is
it removes
verified.
The risk of trust
Right.
being an issue, I suppose. Is what kind of it's difficult
Right.
to get your head around. It took me ages to get my head around it. I think particularly also the other thing I had a problem with is I then assumed that meant that I have to go through wallets, and it is to a certain extent true. But anyone try to use a blockchain wallet? It's horrible, isn't it? It's just the worst experience. And you kind of go, I'm going to put 50 quid into this thing. It's like, where's my money gone? I've got to wait 20 minutes, and then, oh my goodness, back. Okay.
Yeah, we are fundamentally different, and we solve a lot of the challenges there. We're open source. You can install locally right now if you go to quorumcontrol.com/build. I encourage everybody to try to play around with it, because our system is unique in that way.
And I think actually that's an important thing. It's this is something that I think a lot of people like yourselves have understood is really important, that we've got to have a good customer experience. I suppose kind of where I was going was more about where blockchain ends up as a monetization tool is not necessarily in the traditional way that we assume the wallet. For example, it might be the back end of how we manage our assets. It might be the back end of how different games collaborate on shared assets between them. It might be that there's a common set of rules. So for example, in the tokens I designed, we've got standard stats about, you know, the damage a weapon does, the range, its reloading speed, and so on and so forth, which have been done in these broad percentages, so any game could choose to use that number and then feed that into their game. They don't have to use us at all if you've got that gun.
Right.
Now, that's not something everybody's going to do, but that's the mindset that we had when we tried to do it.
Yeah, there's this feeling that like so few games have unlocked the centralized version of monetization that the idea of relinquishing any part of that is terrifying. But it's very much like what the panel before was saying, is that you can't go into blockchain expecting to monetize the same way you did in web, the same way you do in mobile. The principles will always be the same, is that give the player an experience that's curated to their motivations. And again, I can talk at length about that. But the tactics have to be different, and that cultural shift needs to happen with the builders, because the money is there. There's so much money for you guys to just take and go build, but that cultural shift is something that we really need to solve for, because some of the smartest minds in DLT right now are solving for the technical challenges.
One of the things that struck me as well is a lot of people, particularly in the console space, worry about the fact that their assets are now available and can be used by anyone else. So someone could buy a sword in the game and then go and sell that sword for somebody else, and then that other person comes back into your game. Haven't I just lost a sale? No, you haven't. And the reason you haven't is the same reason why secondary purchase was so successful for PC and console games, in the last few decades, because we create a secondary market, and that boosts the willingness of people to spend money in the primary market, so the initial game.
Right. And that shared ecosystem view allows you to understand how many people even want that sword in the first place and what the value of that sword is, and allows you to set the price at first purchase with this trade in mind.
And you could even go further, where the guys at Forte, I was hosting a blockchain event in the week of GDC, and the guy at Forte was saying exactly this, but actually you can actually take a market economy view of how much the value of that sort of new game is. So a lot of the time we have this command model. We decide what the value of a gold coin is, what the value of a gem is in our game. Well, actually, if we let the market decide what that is, then we actually probably get more accurate in terms of what the actual value of that gameplay element is.
Absolutely.
In the experience.
And yeah, like I was saying earlier, is that you can make more informed decisions about the design, about what you're putting out. You're not forced into this punishing digital asset deliverable. On Yahtzee, so I built the retention team for Scopely on Yahtzee. One of the biggest challenges is people loved these Dice Masters. They didn't do anything in the game, they were just collectibles, and people loved them. And we couldn't create enough variety fast enough to leverage that value. And it forced us into this punishing cycle of resources that should have been spent on core game mechanics that wasn't. It was instead on this idea of delivering faster, better, more.
No, absolutely. Oh, it seems like our next speaker has actually turned up more than faster than I thought. So that's good. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. This is the kind of crux of it. It's like understanding the role it plays into your game and how that works. Let's do one last question before we kick off. Anyone else got one last question, or have we filled your need for blockchain until the?
I really encourage everybody to do the blockchain track tomorrow. There's some incredible people speaking, and come find me. I'm happy to talk about this, and our chief product officer is here as well. If anybody actually wants to start building on it today, we can help.
And there's no need to be scared about it. It's just a different way of securing elements in your game rather than having to have a server. It's just basically a database that's done through distribution. So.
It's the 90s utopia we were all promised for the internet.
Maybe not that far.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.